So I see we have a question already. So, and just type them in and we'll get to as many as we can. I'm about 1 year sober in SLAA. I'm a woman, divorced. I'm getting ready to develop a dating plan and get out there. Good for you. I want to be intentional, but I recognize that online dating is a useful tool. How do you recommend navigating online dating, not the hookup apps, good for you, you know the difference, as a female sex and love addict? Do you think that some are more appropriate than others? What's your advice?
That's a great question. It seems more and more a common way to meet people, almost a necessary way sometimes, is online. You meet a larger group of people, but I think it's very tricky for any addict, but especially people who are sex addicts or the chemsex addicts that I treat as well, where a lot of the negotiation for both sex and drugs happens on those online apps. So getting back into them is really tricky. And even using them, if you hadn't used them before, is tricky because it can be very triggering. And so I think some basic self-care is useful just as a kind of a ritual before you even go on there. And that's just really grounding yourself, making sure you're clear, making sure you're very intentional. And I love the fact that you use that word in your question. You're being intentional about it, which is just really being conscious and with a plan. I think I would go slow and I would use it as a tool, simply as an adjunct tool in many other ways that you would meet people. I think it's the real-time meeting for the famous coffee dates that we talk about, or just kind of casual dates, are really important. And I think this is just another tool to do that and meet people. I'd be conscious of how much time you're on there. I'd be conscious of one of the traps I think people fall into is starting to kind of fantasize about the people. We kind of make up stories about people, and suddenly it can be kind of venturing into problematic territory. So I think there's it's really laden with some tricky terrain. One thing I do with some of my clients is I have them bookend sessions online. So they call their sponsor before they go on, they call their sponsor when they're done, and just at least in the beginning to kind of process feelings, triggers, and it happens in real time so they can really start to handle it safely. But I think that what you're doing is a really great idea, because it's a big problem meeting people. I think a lot of people struggle with it. And I think to go at this with some care and thoughtfulness is really important. Beyond that, I think just kind of use your common sense. I would check your boundaries and see what's in the middle and what's in the inner boundary, and make sure you're real clear on that, and see how online programs might fit into that in your plan. But I think just the best luck I've had with clients is when they're really intentional, as I said, when they're really clear, when they share what's going on, when they are kind of process the experience with someone they trust, a sponsor, a trusted friend, and so on, just to kind of keep it all above board. Because it's very tricky with the computer in that it's very hypnotic. We can fall into a trance, a dissociative trance, very easily. And that's very similar to sex addiction and chemsex addiction. Our brains kind of go into that same spot. So it can be very seductive, just the act of doing that online. So I think, again, to be conscious of that, to do it for short, limited periods of time, and to process your experience. Good for you.
Yeah, I want to reiterate one of the things David hit on is it's really easy to project our fantasy of who we want someone to be onto a dating profile. So you have to be careful about that. The people that I work with, I usually, when they want to start dating, I encourage them to do it at about the 1 year sober mark. So I think your timing is really good. I always have them do a dating plan, a written dating plan. It starts out, list your goals. What are you looking for? Are you looking for a long-term relationship? Do you just want to be out there and dating and have a good time? Know what your goals are, number one. And then I have them do, I call it the traffic signals plan. Rob's written about this before. Red lights, green lights, yellow lights. So, red lights are anything about this person that falls into a red light category. You are not going on a date with them. He still lives with his mother. Red light, he doesn't have a job. Red light, he's still married. Red light, things like that. Yellow lights are, he's slow to return phone calls. He doesn't want me to meet his friends. things like that would be a yellow light, proceed with caution. And green lights are, he's self-employed, he's fun, he has interests. I'm assuming he's straight, but I could, whatever. And that really helps with intentionality. And then the other thing David also mentioned was run it past other people. Run your red light, green light, yellow light, red, yellow, green light plan past other people, get their input. Bookend your dates as well as going online to look for dates. And set boundaries for your dates. My first date is coffee for no more than an hour. My second date is dinner or a movie. Third date might be dinner and set some boundaries and follow them, stick to them, be really intentional. And have fun. That's the other thing is you really have to go out with a lot of people before you find the right person. So be okay with that. Be okay with the crappy date. It's practice for a good date later.
And I just want to underscore what you said, Scott, and that just really taking it slow. Have that dating plan where it really builds slowly, because one thing addicts do is jump in fast. And I think we have that kind of state sexologists call limerence, where you kind of intoxicated with someone and the fantasy of someone right off the bat. And that can really kind of accelerate quickly. So take it nice and slow.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and that's where the traffic signals plan also will help. I mean, just because he's hot doesn't mean he's the right guy for you. Having those, these are my red lights, and if he's ticking some of those off, it's a problem. And it's not a relationship that's going to work for you, no matter how good the chemistry is over coffee. Okay, next question. What is the success rate for couples where the addict is in full recovery mode and sober for 4 months, and the partner is avoiding engaging in any recovery tools? Interesting.
Yeah, so, recovery rates are really tricky because they're just really hard to measure. So I always hesitate to do that. People always want a specific number about relapse rates and recovery rates, and it's really hard to say. What I will say from the scenario that you've laid out here is that when one partner is not engaging or avoiding engaging totally in any recovery tools, that's a real problem. Because really to heal, both parties really need to do their own work. And it really needs to be kind of, I think, sequential, in that each individual couple really needs to do a lot of their own work, have their own sponsor, maybe even have their own therapist, and have their own program of recovery. And then the healing of the couple itself can start to occur, but not until both people have really done significant amounts of work. And so when I hear of one partner not or even worse than that, kind of avoiding, that's a warning sign for me that there's some trouble there. And I think I'd want to know what's going on there. Is it just avoidance of feelings? Is it unresolved anger? Is it trauma issues? I mean, who knows what it might be, but I think it's certainly something that needs to be talked about and addressed, because that will start to stall the recovery and impede the recovery for the couple themselves. The other thing that happens with that is that, and this is not an uncommon scenario, where people really recover at different rates. We'll see one person sort of really embrace the program and take off and start moving forward, and the other partner not. And there's a whole dynamic that can be talked about when the addict gets into recovery. I mean, all kinds of changes are kind of forced on the partner as well. And sometimes, usually, in fact, in the long run, those are healthier changes, but there's a change. And I think sometimes people are resistant to that change. So I'd encourage both people there to get help in their own corners, with their own therapist, their own support. But if someone's avoiding it, that's going to be a real problem, because that's going to be a drag on the healing force of both individuals and the couple as a unit too. So that's worrisome to me.
Yeah, Dr. Rob writes, I can't remember whether it's in Out of the Doghouse or Prodependence. I think it's in Prodependence. He has a chapter called Twos Don't Marry Eights. And he talks about the Dudley Moore movie with what's her name, Bo Derek, Ken, how we started attaching numbers to people. And then he switches it to emotional twos don't pair very well with emotional eights, because emotional twos thinks emotional eights are boring and emotional eights think emotional twos are crazy. We gravitate to our own emotional level, and if one person is growing emotionally and the other one's not, we're going to have this, and it's going to be an issue. But David hit it. There could be 100 things underlying the reticence. More will be revealed. Hello. In your opinion, is it possible for an active addict to be an involved father? Husband and I are about to divorce, and I can see that while he plays with her and dotes on her, his patience is very limited. For example, when she vomited, he seemed irritated when I asked for help changing the sheets. And now that she's become more opinionated, he seems irritated with her crying. She's 1 year old and is annoyed with the fact that she still comfort nurses to sleep. He blames me for this. He firmly believes he's being the dad he should be because he's providing for her. But it is in these irritated snippets that I feel hurt and angry for her. Am I asking for too much? The addict believes he has no issues, continues to send gift cards to women online, pays for a subscription to an affair website, hates me and blames me for failed marriage.
Well, I'm sorry to hear all that. I think one of the rationales that a lot of addicts have in terms of their responsibilities for their family and especially for their kids is that if they do provide, they have a roof over their head, meals, even nice clothes, sometimes as they get older, cars or whatever, the material stuff, that's kind of nice and easy, and they think that kind of does the job. And I think you can talk to almost anybody who is an addict today who grew up in a dysfunctional family. They might have had a parent like that. And what we see a lot of times, even though there may be what the parent might think of as a doting parent, there's a lot of issues of neglect. The parents are, there's just no time for the kid for recitals, or they may take no interest, or they may not be encouraging, or they may not be there for those quiet moments, or just when they need comforting. And I think it's, so there's what I'm seeing is from your paragraph there is there's a material presence and a material support, but I think there's an emotional support that's lacking. And I think that's really what children need to thrive. And so I would worry that at best there would be an inconsistent presence on the part of an addict there. And that's typical of an addict. It's not this person in particular. It's typical of addict behavior, I think, to be inconsistent, to be a little self-centered, to be kind of in denial, to rationalize their behavior as enough. But when in fact, when you look at the needs of a child, and again, to take it to zoom forward to adult addicts, we talk about sort of unmet emotional needs, and those start as kids. And that starts with a parent who may be an addict, an active addict, and those needs are unmet. And so I think it's problematic. It's problematic. And so, yeah, I think I rarely have seen someone, I've seen a lot of people, a lot of fathers, some mothers, but mostly fathers, who provide that support and kind of believe they're doing everything they need to do. But we know that there's a broader constellation of things besides just the material support, and then mostly that emotional support. And kids especially, and at 1 year especially, need that constant presence and support. And, you know, kids at that age start to kind of explore the world, but they go back and check with their parent to make sure they're still there. Then they go out again. And that inconsistency on one parent can be a problem. So yeah, it's something to be concerned about, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. The good news is kids tend to do okay if they have one or more good parents. So,
right.
so if your daughter has one good parent, she'll probably be okay. But you know, it's still going to be. It is a form of trauma to have an inconsistent or emotionally, psychologically unavailable parent. It is a form of trauma that she's going to carry with her. And probably have to work through at some point. And I just wanted to add, you know, I'm an addict, I'm long recovering, and one of the things I used to tell myself to justify my addiction and say I was okay was, I make it to work every day and the bills are paid. I somehow that made everything that I did okay. I paid the bills. Okay, I'm cool. No, I was a mess. But it took me a while to see.
That was my line exactly too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I was very good when I got to work, but I never missed a day. I also want to just underscore something so as not to scare you. Kids are really remarkably resilient. And so I think if you can provide that emotional consistency and that support and that presence, your child will be fine. But that really, it's far from ideal. I mean, two parents are really ideal for that.
Yeah, yeah, but one good parent is better than a lot of kids have, better than most kids have, I think, frankly. So next question here. I found this website last February, have been accessing various webinars since. My D-Day was April 1, 2017, when my husband was arrested for soliciting a 13-year-old girl. It was a sting. We were married 25 years and I was blindsided. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. I'm sorry to hear that. It took me 2 years to begin talking about it. I accessed the resiliency webinar, but I was the only woman. I asked if it was appropriate for me to be on, and Troy said it was. That's Troy Love. I believe that's on the 4th Wednesday of the month. But the second time I was on, I was sharing a letter my husband wrote to me from prison about his regrets. It ended up scaring all the men. It's not really a question, but David, did you want to comment on that?
Well, yeah, I think, you can't underestimate the shock and betrayal and all the feelings you must have experienced with that, with your whole world kind of collapsing underneath you. So I'm really glad you've been reaching out, and I really love the idea of resilience, where we can really learn to, the skills we can apply to kind of get through these moments in our lives. And
we do have a question actually here that follows it in the next one. Okay. Are there resources for partners whose husbands or any family member have been snared in the legal system? He's now labeled a sex offender for life.
Gosh, Scott, I don't know. I don't know offhand.
There is, oh crap. There is one organization for families. I will try to look these up real quick and post them in the chat feature for you.
Yeah, and I do really want to say, please keep showing up to these places, because you really need to share. And I think actually the message, it may be scary for these men, but it's an important thing to hear. But this is your experience, and you have a right to get your support. And so make sure you keep doing that for yourself, because this is a tremendous shock, and it's going to be a lot of effort for you to kind of regain your footing. So I wouldn't be too concerned about the impact it has on other people in these groups. So that if a group is moderated, especially, that should be able to be managed in a way that I'd hate to see you leave for fear of upsetting the other members of the group.
Yeah, those guys might have needed to hear that. They might have needed to be scared. So I wouldn't worry about scaring them. Yeah, get the support you need. I've got an article on this somewhere. So David, can you take over for a second?
Yeah, the other thing I want to just say, and this is true for addicts and partners, is that the idea of connection is so important. So the social connection, having robust social networks of people that are in our lives. And really it's the hallmark of addiction and of co-addiction, or partners, to isolation. Addiction does that. And we can be surrounded by a cast of thousands in our addiction, but it's all kind of, we're inside this bunker emotionally, and we're disconnected. And so I think recovery is all about reestablishing those and overcoming the shame and the fear and the anger and all those feelings that keep us trapped. And so I really commend you for kind of reaching out and making those connections, because that is where the healing occurs. We cannot do this ourselves, and we really absolutely need to be socially connected with each other. And I think it's almost a direct correlation to I've been doing this 30 years. The people that make it are the ones that start to really get connected with other people, not just in their recovery groups, but with their peers, with their friends, and it spreads out with their families, with a broader social network. So anything you can do to kind of move past anything that would isolate you or disconnect you toward connection, I think is going to be a really healing force for you. Yeah. Yeah. And I think just I can't imagine the shock that must have had for you and your family. And so it's another problem we often see, the idea of women, both women who are sex addicts, there's often not as many resources for them, although we do have one on this site as well, but it's sometimes a problem. And I think sometimes the groups do get kind of very gender-based, and that can be a problem for people really speaking up and getting the help they need. So kudos for you for reaching out in the first place, and I hope you do continue.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just posted some resources. Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers, which is www.atsa.com. I think that's probably the best one for you, and you can find some support there and some resources. And also Safer Society Foundation, which is safersociety.org, not .com. And I put that in the chat feature for you.
Great.
So,
terrific.
yeah, and good luck to you and to your husband. Next one, I'm a partner of a sex romantic relationship addict. I thought it was just an affair, but we recently realized it's actually an addiction. As for myself, I'm a survivor of child abuse. My partner says I wanted to protect you and take care of you, and then looked for wild sex outside of our relationship, ended up hurting me. He's going for therapy at last. How can we recover our relationship? I do want to help him and heal myself. What is the strategy? Great question.
Wow. Yeah. A complicated scenario, but not an unusual one, frankly, with the partner being you being a survivor of child abuse, and the partner wanting to protect you, and sort of a lot of times that in my experience, that kind of protective energy can kind of turn into more controlling, almost scary energy sometimes too. You don't say that's happening, but there's some power dynamics that happen in that scenario. So I think the recovery that I would see is for each of you to start doing your own work. I don't know how much work you've done on your child use of child abuse, the trauma that must have resulted from that. But I think sometimes when we have experienced that as children and haven't done a lot of work on it, we are attracted to people as adults who kind of sort of to meet some of those unmet needs. In that case, maybe it's a very common core belief of children who are abused to feel not safe, to feel unprotected and not safe. And so sometimes in adulthood, they choose partners who initially make them feel that way, but it often doesn't end up feeling that way. So I think the key to that is to really to do their own individual work. There's a great kind of couples therapy called imago therapy, but part of the theory of that is that we choose our partners as adults. The kind of ideal partner is this blend of our caregivers when we were children. Both their good and bad aspects, and they were kind of at some subconscious level looking to rework that and heal and have a happy ending, a happier ending than our childhood. And often we just get re-wounded. And so I think it starts with you and your work, and hopefully him and his work, where he can go. The other thing you mentioned there, and this is another common scenario that we see, is that this kind of disconnect between emotional connection and love and lust, that wild sex you're talking about. And that's typical of sex addiction, porn addiction, chemsex addiction, where those two really become split off. And I think one of the aspects of healing and recovery is to bring those two back together, where you can feel sexual arousal with someone you have emotional feelings for, and vice versa. But that takes a lot of trust and healing, and is maybe down the road. But I would certainly encourage him to get into some kind of one of the S programs to look at his own behavior, his own recovery, what he's searching for, what his unmet needs are, and really for you to look at some of those abuse issues and see how that's impacting your life today, in terms of what core beliefs are operating with you, what behavioral decisions did you make a long time ago that are still affecting you, and really work it through so that you can rework your relationship from a really healthy foundation. And you're not both coming from wounded places. And when couples do that, the outcomes are typically not good. So I wish you the best of luck. I really commend you for the kind of awareness that you have describing the situation. But I really encourage you both to kind of do your work, with both you with your trauma history and him with whatever his history is, but certainly his behavior in the present moment. I think that'd be very useful for you.
Yeah, I want to add, when David mentioned S programs, by that he means Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, for anybody who doesn't know that. I also wanted to comment, one of the most common excuses that partnered sex addicts give for keeping secrets is, well, I was trying to protect you, I didn't want to hurt you. It's part of their denial. They think they're doing you a favor by cheating on you and not telling you. And usually for a betrayed partner, it's the lack of truth, it's the lies and the secrets that hurt more than the actual behavior over time. And that's the hardest part of the relationship to heal, is rebuilding trust. And that's going to take a year or more. And that's if he gets into recovery and works a good program and gets honest with you, and you're doing your own work. And then as you're both doing your work, your relationship can start to heal.
Right.
And that starts with him being trustworthy, and you being open enough to trust that he's being trustworthy. And that's very hard.
Right.
So,
you do say he's going to therapy, and I do hope that includes one of the sex addiction meetings, 12-step fellowships, because it's really an essential part of his work. And
I would also add it's essential that he sees a certified sex addiction therapist.
Right. A therapist is really aware of these issues. Because they're really, it's a special phenomenon, and it requires a special bit of knowledge on the part of the therapist.
Yeah. Next one here. My good friend is a love addict and has an entangled relationship with her abusive ex-husband. Her 4-year-old son lashes out at her very violently, scratches her, bruises her, etc. I'm so worried that he's really going to hurt her. If she refuses to get her son professional help, would you consider that neglect?
Big yes. Yeah, there's certainly issues there. Anytime a child is behaving like that, there's some serious issues going on. That's really a desperate cry for help on the part of the child. And we were speaking earlier of unmet needs, and I suspect that child has some there. And children absorb everything, they reflect, they're very honest mirrors sometimes of what's going on in the household. They have no agenda except to be loved. And when we see a kid acting like that, it's really telling that things are not right. Things are very much out of balance in the household. And so when you have an abusive ex-husband, that's often reflected in the behavior of the child, from that inconsistency, the neglect, just what the child witnesses. And we do know, by the way, that even if the child themselves aren't the recipient of that abuse, witnessing the abuse is the equivalent therapeutically of actually being abused. So what that means is that people will develop post-traumatic stress and other kinds of trauma issues just by seeing someone else be abused. Seeing their mother get hit is as bad as the child being hit themselves in terms of the bad outcome psychologically. So the child's been through a lot. And I think definitely it would be really wrong to not get him some support from someone who's certified or trained with child behavioral issues, because that's a clear cry for help. The other thing, at 4, other things start to emerge, and there may be other issues going on with this child that need to be addressed early that could really help him. Sometimes when we see those behavioral issues, it's indicative of some other childhood concerns. And so I think I would really, the child needs some attention, needs a good workup, and certainly some therapy for sure.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. It's right on the money. This is a follow-up from that question about the husband in prison. Troy lost. There are definitely other groups where you're welcome. You're obviously welcome in this one. David and I have a group on Wednesdays at 5. You're welcome in our group. And there are some support groups that are specifically for women and for betrayed partners. So you may want to look into those because those are going to be mostly women, and some of them may be in your situation or something similar. At the very least, they've suffered some really awful betrayal. I mean, we have David and I on our Wednesday session. We hear stories of horrible betrayal. So yeah, don't give up. If that group didn't work for you, try the other ones. We've got a bunch of them. And there may be. Go ahead, David.
I was going to say, your last sentence here is you're finding out at your age that this is just too big to handle alone. I just want to reiterate, please do not try to handle it alone. You know, I think in our culture, we try to think we have to pull it together and just go forward. And I think we really need help, and we really need the support of other people doing it. So yeah, continue reaching out, stay connected.
Yeah. Okay, next one here. While seeing a couples therapist to deal with my husband's affair, he admitted to behavior that led to him being diagnosed as a sex addict. He is actively pursuing treatment via therapy, SAA meetings, informational videos, etc. Good. I'm trying to come to terms with being sexually intimate with him on many different levels. This is a very common issue. We had a very active sex life, even while he was habitually watching porn and having an affair. His desire for me never seemed to lessen. One of my many hangups is that I'm concerned that having sex with me was part of his addiction, or that having sex with me could become his new drug of choice now that he is not watching porn or having an affair. Are these issues I should be concerned with? If so, what boundaries can we put in place to prevent our sex life from becoming unhealthy for us? I just want to let you know, this is a really common question, is when we start to reintegrate sex, how do we do that in a healthy way? And you have your issues that you've got to work through around it, and he's got his issues. So with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Yeah, exactly. We see this all the time. I think it's a process. It's a process of each person coming to terms with their behavior, with the partner, slowly giving trust when it's earned, and keep in mind the addict always wants that trust faster than the partner's willing to give it. It's a process. They're out of sync for a long time, but it all comes down to vulnerability and trust. And I think you can't really have connected sex, if you will. And that's a sex with an emotional component to it, unless there's a lot of trust and vulnerability there. I think sometimes, and that might be the one thing to look for when you're, one distinction I make is that sex, when it's coming from an addictive place, often is sex, or it's sex without an emotional component. It's sex to numb, it's sex to escape, it's sex for distraction, but it's really missing that depth to it. And I think that's one thing to check for if you're feeling connected emotionally, and to keep in mind that a lot of couples struggle with sex. I often say, just don't worry about orgasm, don't worry about penetrative sex, just hold each other, caress, massage, get to know each other on an intimate level, on a body level, and in ways that you might not have done before. Certainly I think it's a problem I see when couples use porn as part of their sexual interaction to maybe kind of get it going again. Sometimes it's hard, and they have pornography playing, which I think is like a third person in the room. I think that's a really harmful thing in that it disconnects the couple from each other. You want everything to really be focused on the couple and getting together and learning to trust and explore. And I think to take it slow. Sometimes people feel they have to go back to that really hot and heavy sex, and it's really, they're learning how to be intimate again. And in my experience, I do a lot of work with gay men who There's a whole other component of shame sometimes, but it's a universal thing that a lot of times when we are addicts and there's a sexual component to our addiction, it's all kind of done in a mood altered state. When we get clean and sober and get into recovery as a sex addict, suddenly we're dealing with sex and intimacy without all the medication in terms of our behavior to numb us and to distract us and to dissociate. And it's really real. And it's very kind of right there in all our feelings and vulnerabilities. And so I think having that sense of trust, keeping it playful. I think sometimes when couples re-engage like this, it's really heavy and serious, and that it is heavy and serious, and that it's an emotional risk, and you're kind of getting back together, you're building something, but it also has to be fun. This is a big part of life, and we need to enjoy it. So whatever you can do to make it fun, to make it light, to make it connected, to make it safe, those are the things that I would strive for. And remember that there's no timetable for this. At 6 months or 9 months or 12 months or 18 months, you shouldn't be at this point or that point. Every couple has their own trajectory with this. I think it goes back to your communication with your partner, your level of trust, and getting feedback. So oftentimes addicts don't share what's really going on, and sometimes partners don't either. And just really be honest. In terms of, I like being connected with you. It felt good. I didn't like this. I liked that. Whatever the feedback might be, I think it's really helpful. I will say if you don't know, there's a great exercise for couples by Masters and Johnson called Sensate Focus, which might be good here. And it's really a pleasuring exercise where people take turns. The one partner is the pleasurer, the other partner is the receiver. And at first it's non-sexual. You don't touch the genitals, but you rub, you caress, kiss, tickle, whatever stroke, whatever connection, physical connection you can make. And the partner gives you feedback. I like that. I don't like that. Do that more, do that harder, do that softer. And it reestablishes, it kind of reboots that physical connection between couples and reestablishes a way to communicate. And I've had many couples who were together a long time, got into recovery, tried this, and they really discovered things about each other that they hadn't really learned before. So take it slow, make sure you feel safe, and have fun, enjoy it. It should come naturally at some point.
Yeah, for those who don't know, I'm a recovering sex addict. And as a recovering sex addict, I'm the kind of person who said, when the therapist says, well, you might be ready to start thinking about reintegrating sex with your partner into your relationship, what I hear is, I have to have sex tonight, or something's wrong with me and our relationship. And that is not what my therapist told me, but is what I hear. So that may be where your husband is, and where you may be thinking, oh shit, if I don't have sex tonight, he may act out with someone else. And, at the same time, you're worrying about being objectified, and, you're going to become the drug. And there's so many things going on. And if all that's going swirling in your head, it's going to be really hard to enjoy a sexual interaction with each other. It's probably time to back up and do some of the things David talked about, where you just talk, and even when you are ready for sex, I encourage you to talk a lot during sex. It's hard to objectify somebody when you're having a conversation with them. So just a thought, but take your time. You don't have to have sex tonight.
Right.
You can have sex when you're both emotionally and psychologically feeling connected and ready and wanting it.
Right.
There's no rush. You're not going anywhere. He's not going anywhere.
Right.
Yeah. Is there an SA group online? SA is Sexaholics Anonymous. There's also Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sexual Compulsives Anonymous. There's a couple porn groups. We have them listed in our resource section on sexandrelationshiphealing.com and on seekingintegrity.com. So I'll just answer that question real quick. There are online groups. All of those programs have some online groups. Just go to their websites. You can find them. So the next one is much more in David's bailiwick. Is online therapy effective? How long does it take? And how do you know if there is recovery?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's starting to be a lot of literature that shows that online therapy is quite effective. Um, I, I personally like face-to-face if I can do it still, because you really get a sense of the person in a maybe more three-dimensional way. But we do know that online therapy can be effective, and it's especially for sex addiction where it does require that specialized training we were talking about before, the CSAT, and there aren't that many of them around the country. So we see a lot of people in parts of the country or the world that don't have ready access to someone who's skilled, a therapist who's skilled with sex addiction. So the online meetings kind of become a lifeline for a lot of people, and the online therapy as well. So yes, it can absolutely be effective. It takes the same kind of commitment as regular therapy does, same kind of showing up on both people's parts. Sometimes you have to work a little bit harder to communicate, I think, to make sure you're being heard and understood, because sometimes the body language isn't always visible and you kind of can't sense the mood of the person. But yeah, I think it's totally effective. The only concern I have about that is that I would merge it with a group. Going back to my, I guess, theme of the evening, which is connection. If you can have some kind of group cohort and connection, that's really important as well. One-to-one therapy, and I'm a therapist, and so I believe in that, obviously, but I don't think that's enough to really push you into recovery from addiction. It really has to be more, and it has to be more in terms of groups. But I think therapy is an essential component simply because there are things that aren't appropriate to discuss in a group that you can go into depth with on a therapist. So how do you know if there's recovery? I think you'll start to feel it. You'll start to feel the difference. I'm in recovery myself as well. And I certainly know when I'm in recovery, and early on, I knew when I was kind of getting back into my addictive head, and meetings and my therapist, frankly, were the ones that kind of shook me out of it and got me back on track. So therapy, like your sponsor, like your friends, are a mirror for you, and they're going to show you and hopefully point out things you may not see. And that it takes a willingness. This is hard work. This is like the advanced class for therapy with addiction. And it takes a lot of willingness to be open to receiving feedback and to learning and growing, because addiction really is, to me, it's all about defensive patterns. My addiction kind of blossomed out of these things that I built to keep me safe in this very dysfunctional way. And if I kind of get rid of my addiction, my walls start to come down. I really needed the support and help. And the way I knew it was working was that started to feel comfortable. I started to understand what was going on, why I did things, and started to be able to change in healthier ways. So yeah, it's totally possible. I don't know. A lot of insurance companies actually are paying for teletherapy now. So it's become quite a legitimate thing. My frustration, frankly, is that I'm licensed in one state, but I can't do therapy in the 49 other states. And teletherapy really has to kind of catch up with the realities of the internet. But if you can find someone in your state who does it, I think you'll be in good hands.
Next one, this goes back to our question about the 4-year-old who's acting out, who I think we all agree needs some help. How do you recommend that I communicate this to my good friend?
That's a great question. I think when we have a concern about someone, I think a great way to start that conversation is to ask permission to have the conversation. I think if I go in and sort of just drop a bomb on my friend especially about child rearing, and where there's an addiction in place, where there's probably defenses in place, it's probably not going to be received well. So when I have a delicate conversation like that, I often say, hey, look, I have a concern, I have something I really like to talk to you about it. Is this a good time, or when could we talk about it, if you're willing? And so really give that person the choice of controlling the time and place, and then say, this is my concern, and I would just be frank with it and speak from the heart. Um, and sometimes people will get defensive. I wouldn't get into an argument with the person. I wouldn't get into trying to convince the person. I would just share your experience and your observation. And that person is going to have to take it with it what they will. Sometimes you can have a deeper dialogue with that. Oftentimes, and this is where you have to kind of judge. There's a question, I think, about how much advice to give. I think sometimes it's more useful to just express your concern and maybe perhaps a remedy that you might see. But I think to get into too prescriptive a conversation can start to turn the person off. So basically, I would just express your concern as clearly as you can. See what the feedback is. If the person is open to more feedback, I would delve further into it. Don't make it about yourself. Don't offer unsolicited advice if the person clearly isn't ready for it. But I do think it's important. It's friends like you who are going to be that mirror that we were talking about before that really helps somebody see. And I guarantee that person knows that her child needs some help. But for whatever reason, families, as you may know, in an addictive cycle, they get locked into place in these kind of dysfunctional dynamics. And so I think it would be a nice healing gesture to have that friend hear those words. So I'd ask permission. I'd sit down in a place that's convenient for you both, and where it's receptive, where you can't get distracted, and just express your needs very simply and see where it goes.
Yeah, and she may or may not be receptive, but she'll hear you, and she may be receptive 3 months from now. It may occur, suddenly it'll pop into her head and think, oh, I really do need to do this.
And that's such an important point because, oftentimes, I'll use the example of a therapy practice, where your business card, you give it out and it's not an instant reaction, right? People put on their refrigerator, they put on their desk, and it may be 3 months or 6 months down the road, like, oh yeah, I remember that person, and they pick up the card. And this is the kind of thing too, the person, she may not be able to deal with it now, but she's going to hear it, and it'll be there. It'll be kind of percolating in the background for sure.
Next question. What is the Wednesday session? David and I do this on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. You can find us on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. It's an addiction and recovery webinar with Q&A. So David usually talks for about 10 to 15 minutes about a specific topic, and then we take questions on that or anything else. But it's very similar to what we're doing tonight.
And I must say, as you can all see, we're totally fabulous. So
yes,
please join us on Wednesdays, except not this Wednesday. We're not doing it the night before Thanksgiving, but every other Wednesday of the year will be on.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay. Next question. D-Day was 18 months ago. He had a 4-year affair with no emotional involvement, according to him. His addiction goes back to his teens. He is in counseling, says he has not had any temptation to look at porn or contact the affair partner. His shame and anger at himself for what he has done is the biggest block to our recovery at this point. How can he get past that?
It's a great question. One of the things we work on a lot at Seeking Integrity is shame. And shame probably is the central feature of these intensity addictions, sex addiction, porn addiction, chemsex addiction. They're all rooted in a sense of shame. And that shame is all bundled up with sex and our ideas about who we are and as people. And so shame is a big problem. One of the things we often teach is that shame has absolutely no productive value. And then we talk about the shame spiral that people can get into, where it just kind of goes and it kind of pulls people down into this pit that's very hard to escape from. So shame really is something that is old. The way I talked with my clients about it is that it's something that was taught to us. No child is born with shame. It's given to us, and it may be from our parents or from the church or from schools or society. As I mentioned, I do a lot of work with gay and bisexual men, lesbians, and the sexual minorities who have, had a lot of those issues from the church and from, the courts and from their parents and families, and rejection and shame and all of that. And it's not just the gay community, by the way, it's everybody, especially people I think that have sex addictions. One universal thing you can say is shame is there. And so the shame really is kind of given to us. And as kids, we don't know how to not take it. We absorb it. And so one of the processes of healing, I think, is to really get rid of that shame and really bear it. And that happens, I think, most effectively in a group setting or in a trusted relationship where you can start to talk about it. You know, shame is really the sense that there's something just wrong about me. I am a flawed person, as opposed to guilt, which is more feeling bad about something I did. Shame is about me. It's like there's something just wrong with me. And that feeling is just deadly. And that feeling is the one that addicts want to numb and escape from so commonly. So to deal with shame, to really uproot it, to drag it out into the daylight, I think shame doesn't do very well in sunlight. And so I think to talk about it, to expose it, to the steps, by the way, are really good. They're a really good process for managing this, for identifying it, starting to release it, to heal from it. So the steps really give an outline for dealing with it, but it's an essential issue. And so, yeah, shame and anger, big deals. The other thing I would just want to say about anger, I look at anger as a secondary emotion. And but by that, what I mean is when somebody's feeling anger, there's always a feeling underneath it. So I'll ask my clients if they're angry about something, like, okay, just drop down under the anger. What is it that you're feeling underneath? And almost always it's fear or hurt or sadness. But keep in mind, if you're feeling anger, that's not the bottom. You have to drop down and see what the real feeling is there. Anger is a reaction. And so, but you nailed it. Anger and shame are two big barriers to recovery that absolutely have to be addressed head on.
Shame for an addict, particularly a sex addict, is the master emotion. It drives the addiction. David hit it on the head. There's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. I'm flawed. I'm defective. I don't deserve to be loved. If I take my needs to other people, they will not meet them because I am awful. So I turn to alcohol, drugs, sex, porn, whatever, because that's safer and it distracts me from my unmet needs. It doesn't meet my needs. It just distracts me for a little while, which is why I keep going back to it. I need more distraction and more distraction. For me, shame, group therapy and 12-step meetings and working the steps. I needed to be around other people with my problem and hear them talk about it, and to realize I wasn't alone and I wasn't these guys, I would think, wow, he seems really together. He's a good guy. And then he would share something that I had done and felt tremendous shame about. And it would help me with my own shame as he was helping himself with his shame. David mentioned it earlier, the power of the group, the power of connection. And shame, shame, Brene Brown has, I forget his name, one of her research assistants. And I heard him speak and he said, other people taught me how to do shame as a little kid. And then I learned how to do it all by myself. But we can't undo shame all by ourselves. We need other people to undo shame. We have to expose it to the light of day and realize that 99% of the stuff we feel shame about is not true.
Yeah, for sure.
You want to take one more here, David?
Sure.
We're running out of time. Okay. Sorry, everybody, we're running out of time. We got lots more questions. So I'm a female recovering addict, NA member, that's Narcotics Anonymous, 19 months clean, congratulations. My biological father was abusive, he used to hit my mother. I was 3 years old when she finally decided to leave him, and she found another man that I adopted as my father. He is a sex addict. They were together for 27 years of lies, him constantly being caught with other women, her waking up in the middle of the night, catching him watching porn. He never got help. She denied a lot of things that were going on. He left last year with another woman. I'm sharing this because I heard the recovering trust part after being betrayed. One moment, please. David, can you take that over?
Yeah, after being betrayed, my mother all these years grew resentful, and she would lash out at everyone and everything for what my stepfather would do. She blames us for him leaving. She never looked at her professional. She never looked for professional help. So yeah, I can identify with the trust issue part. These have been my intimacy models since I was a child. I resent my mother a lot because I can't trust her. How can I heal? So yeah, well, congratulations on your recovery, first of all. That's huge. I think because we are running out of time, we're out of time. I think the way to heal with that is to really sort of take over for yourself, to not look for other people to really sort of fix you or heal you or support you, but really to kind of create the connection with yourself that I think you probably never learned in your home. And by that, I mean doing a lot of work on yourself to reconnect with those wounded parts, and as an adult to kind of help heal the parts of you that are still kind of crying for some of that support and love. And I think you certainly didn't have great models for healthy living, so I would look for models elsewhere in the program. Honesty, communication, trust, integrity, all those things. You're gonna have to sort of import from somewhere else. But you're obviously doing something right with that recovery, so keep it up.
Yeah, this childhood is like the classic. I'm gonna grow up and be an addict
That's
childhood.
right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hang in there, and congrats on the clean time.
Yeah.
We are out of time, everyone. Thank you, everybody, for attending and for all your questions. We're sorry we didn't get to everything, but
Yeah.
not this Wednesday, but the following Wednesday, you can follow up, or Rob will be back next week. David,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Yeah.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.
Okay, good night.